Good evening. Welcome back to another episode of the Lord of the Rings LCG Progression Series. And tonight's a card review of the expansion A Shadow in the East. So let's take a look. First hero is Frodo Baggins, a leadership version. 7 threat, 2/1/2, 2 health. It's the same stats as his spirit version. After Frodo commits to the quest, spend 1 resource from his resource pool to ready another unique character committed to the quest. If you quest successfully this phase, reduce your threat by 1. Interesting. So this is his version, given the flavor text, would be the version from the Scouring of the Shire at the end of the Return of the King book, which was not included to the movie. In the movies, which made me sad, because that was one of my favorite parts of Return of the King. This hero is thematic and fun, but not particularly good. It doesn't fulfill any of the major roles that we look for. He's not a resource generator. He's not a card drawer. He's not going to be a main attacker to build around or a main defender. So he is a supporting hero at best, and I would rank him as a fun supporting hero, or a fun thematic hero. He can provide some action advantage if he has resources. He can provide a little bit of threat reduction, but his primary usage would be another option for a low threat leadership hero. Actually, he's the lowest threat leadership hero in the game, I think. So he might have a role when you need access to leadership, but you're pushing threat pretty high with other champions. But that's going to be his only role. He's not going to be your attacker, defender, resource generator, or card drawer. So that's his use. If you need access to the leadership sphere and you need very low threat on the hero, you could turn to Frodo Baggins. And he would still provide something in terms of supporting the other heroes and providing a little threat reduction. And it's not nothing. He'll do the role okay. He'll do the role, just fine. But he is a support hero for higher threat heroes, or a fun thematic hero in a combat deck, in my opinion. I think his other version was much better. I liked his other version a lot at the time. This version, there's not much else to say about him. Sméagol, 3 threat, 2/2/2, so we get a hero version of Sméagol. I like that. 3 threat, 2/2/2, 3 health, cannot have attachments. Shuffle 2 copies of Stinker into the encounter deck. So I have all the cards that we need to talk about with Gollum here, or Sméagol. Sméagol, Gollum is the backside of Sméagol. And then you have the extra card Stinker, which has to be shuffled into the encounter deck when you start the game. And if Stinker should come up, it surges and it makes Gollum flip to... You make Sméagol flip to the Gollum side, or if Gollum is out, it makes him attack immediately. So Sméagol also has the ability, after you travel to a location, raise your threat by 1 to draw 1 card. Sméagol is an interesting hero. 3 threat is the lowest in the game. That's crazy low. 2/2/2/3 isn't going to fulfill any of your primary roles, but it seems his Sméagol's main role, like Frodo, is his low threat. You can also get some card draw from him. However, he's not powerful enough in the card draw to fulfill the primary card draw role. Cards that champions that fulfill the card draw role at an elite level would be, an example would be Elrond with Vilya, who draws a card every round. Gandalf, who can potentially draw a card every round, perhaps multiples, very easily with the attachment Expert Treasure Hunter, or now Messenger Raven, though Expert Treasure Hunter is better. But Gandalf can draw a card every round. Sméagol is not going to draw a card every round. He's going to draw a card maybe 3, 4, times per game or something like that. But not every round. But he's not bad. He's a supporting hero. with his low threat and some card draw, he reminds me very much of the leadership version of Frodo, because he's low threat and he provides decent abilities but nothing spectacular. I think actually Sméagol might be a little bit better than Frodo, with the big caveat that sometimes he's going to flip to Gollum and then you have to attack him and he's going to be terrible during that time. So, all things considered evening out, I'd rank these heroes as pretty similar to each other. They're supporting, fun thematic heroes you might turn to if you had a necessity for really low threat in your deck, but otherwise you would turn to them for the fun thematic aspects to the card that they bring to the game, and not necessarily because you're expecting great things from them. Though you're not going to be sad about the card draw you get from Sméagol, except that you do have to raise your threat by one for it, and that is a factor. And with Frodo, he can lower threat if you quest successfully, and so they sort of go together in that regard. I would guess that's the point. If Sméagol should flip to his Gollum side, he's a 2/2/2 enemy with 3 health who engages the first player. Not that big a deal, but you're pretty sad if it happens turn 1. So I would rank both of these heroes as pretty similar, and I would rank them as fun thematic heroes, or heroes that you might turn to if you needed really low threat. With Frodo access to the leadership sphere, with Sméagol just really, really low threat, and still you get something for him. The One Ring. It's an artifact, a ring, a master, immune to non-master card effects. Setup, attach to a hero you control and search your deck for a master card. Add it to your hand and shuffle your deck. Your threat elimination level is reduced by 5. So a lot to talk about here. First of all, immune to non-master card effects means it's not going to be discarded by encounter cards that may try to discard attachments. You attach it to a hero at the start of the game, it's guaranteed, and you get a master card in your hand at the start of the game. But you're eliminated if your threat hits 45 instead of 50. Let's talk about the master cards, because the ring doesn't do anything all by itself. It only does things in that it allows you to play other cards. So the first one, the Master Ring, 0 cost, exhaust the One Ring and raise your threat by 1 to cancel the effects of an encounter card just revealed from the encounter deck, and discard that card, then reveal an encounter card. One other thing to note about the One Ring is that it can't be played in Saga expansions. So take that into account. So you can raise threat by 1 to cancel an encounter card, and discard that card, and then reveal an encounter card. It's okay. You can start with it in your hand. It's okay. Could help you deal with some nasty cards. The Ruling Ring. Exhaust the One Ring and raise your threat by 1 to choose a non-Nazgul enemy engaged with you until the end of the phase. That enemy cannot attack you. Once again, it's okay. It's nothing phenomenal. It's not typically going to win a game, but it could help you with a number of different challenges, especially against encounter decks. So if you're having a big problem getting set up because you keep getting demolished by what the encounter deck throws at you from the staging area in the first turn, the first round, then you could use the Ruling Ring. You could play the One Ring and 1 copy of the Ruling Ring, and you would automatically draw it to start the game, and then you could play it, and it would help you overcome the wall at the beginning. That could be very good with very little investment required. Almost no investment required, in fact. So there are definitely possibilities for this in elite decks, for the One Ring and the Ruling Ring. Maybe even the Master Ring. I don't think that's the one you'd want to start with in your hand, because you don't know for sure that a horrifying encounter card is coming. But you could know for sure that a horrifying enemy would need an attack cancelled in round 1 because the quest forces you to start with an enemy in encounter in the staging area. The Ring of Power, exhaust the one ring and raise your threat by 1 to ready the hero with the one ring attached. That hero gets +1, +1, and +1 until the end of the phase. This one's the most likely one to play 3 of. So in my mind, I think the most likely way to play the one ring is the one ring, 1 copy of the ruling ring, 3 copies of the Ring of Power, and possibly the Master Ring, depending on what encounter cards you're going to be facing. But most likely 3 copies of the Ring of Power and 1 copy of the ruling ring to start with in your hand. Possibly 2 more copies of the ruling ring, although I think this card, the ruling ring, falls off more and more as you get set up. Once you stabilize your board state, you probably won't need to cancel an attack too much. Feint is a card that fell out of favor with me as the game's life cycle went on. But since you can guarantee starting with it in your hand when you play the one ring, and you can use it to overcome specific challenges, like for example Nightmare, Journey Along the Anduin, you could block the Hill Trolls attack in round 1 guaranteed. That's crazy good for that quest. And the Ring of Power, how good is readying a hero for 1 threat and getting +1/+1/+1? I don't know if you would want to run 3 of these, to be honest, now that I think about it. It's good. I don't know if it's worth the 3 of card slot. I don't think you'd want to necessarily need to start with this in the opening hand. Although maybe you might for some specific challenges. If you really knew you'd need 2 defenses round 1 or something like that, or 2 attacks round 1. You could maybe run, I think maybe I will reassess my thought from earlier and say the way I would probably most often play the one ring is 1 copy of the one ring and 1 copy of the Ring of Power and 1 copy of the ruling ring in order to deal with threats. And I would change whether I draw the Ring of Power or the ruling ring to start the game based on which challenge I'm trying to overcome. But the one ring is definitely an elite card. It has a place in elite decks. It can help you to overcome challenges, and the fact that it's guaranteed means you can rely on it without needing to run too many cards. You don't need 3 of to make sure you get it. It reduces the luck involved in defeating some of the challenges where you start the game against the wall. I think that's its intention, is to help overcome really difficult quests. Getting toward the end of the game's official life cycle, and it seems like now is the time for getting cards in the game that will allow you to overcome the most difficult quests and give you options in deck building. So the one ring, definitely an elite card. Mary, 2 cost 2002. After Mary enters play, each unique ally you control gets +1 willpower until the end of the round. Interesting. That's pretty good. 2 cost for 2 willpower is great, and any ability you get is just a bonus. That's a great card. I find the heroes in this expansion to be kind of more fun thematic heroes, but so far the other 2 cards we looked at, the One Ring along with its master cards and Mary, those are great cards. That's a great ally. Very, very good ally. I would be happy just with 2 cost for 2 willpower out of the leadership sphere. Any bonus just makes him a great card. He'd be a good card with just 2 cost for 2 willpower. The addition of the ability makes him a great card, and definitely the best version of Mary, in my opinion. Pippin, 2 cost for 2 willpower, 0 attack, 0 shields, 2 health. Pippin gets +2 attack while attacking an enemy with an engagement cost higher than your threat. After you engage an enemy with an engagement cost higher than your threat, ready Pippin. Well, 2 cost for 2 willpower is great out of the tactics sphere. And the ability just makes him really good card. Both Merry and Pippin, these are the best versions of Merry and Pippin. They're very, very good. Very good cards, and the One Ring is a very good card. These 3 cards alone are enough for me to recommend buying this expansion. This is off to a great start, in spite of the fact that the heroes, Frodo and Sméagol, are kind of fun thematic heroes for me. The One Ring, Merry, and Pippin are so good that I would recommend this expansion just on those alone. This is a great version of Pippin. I mean, just the 2 cost for 2 willpower is good. With the ability, it's a great card. A new ally version of Faramir, 4 cost, 2/1/2, 3 health. He's Gondor Noble and a Ranger. After he enters play, choose a non-unique enemy in the staging area. Engage that enemy and deal 2 damage to it, 4 damage instead if it has an attachment on it. Well, that's great in like the Damrod Traps deck. He's still gonna face the problem that his leadership version is so good. The leadership ally version of Faramir is so good, it's hard to justify playing another version of him. If we compare the two, I mean, leadership Faramir, ally leadership Faramir beats everything, I think. So when he enters play, you can deal 2 damage to an enemy from the staging area, engage it. Now that does mean you have to have left an enemy in the staging area from last round, which you don't usually want to do. Usually you want to clear the staging area every round if you can. If you found you couldn't last round, this could help you catch up, but if you can't do that, clear the staging area by the time Faramir is playable, because he does cost 4, you're probably in some trouble. So I think he's more designed for a traps deck. He does elevate the traps deck. I don't think he elevates the traps deck to elite status, though. To elevate the traps deck to elite status, you need something that adds consistent attack power every round, or card draw, or resource generation, or defense. And he, as a one-time use card, well, he provides willpower, attack, and shields, but nothing to speak of. And he can deal 4 damage, but only 1 time. So I would still play leadership ally Faramir, who's from the leadership sphere. But I would consider Faramir in like a fun thematic traps deck. This version, the lore version. Derafin, 3 cost, 1/2/1, 2 health. After Derafin participates in an attack that destroys an enemy engaged with a player, discard Derafin to reduce the engaged player's threat by X, where X is the destroyed enemy's printed threat. Well, turning him into a non-permanent effect, that's almost never good on a card. Like, a discard this ally to do something has to be really, really good before I'll consider it. I don't recall hardly ever playing a card that did something like that in a really strong deck. Maybe very early in the game, but not since then. This effect is okay, but not good enough to justify turning him into a non-permanent effect. I don't think that's a very good card. It's interesting that it's Gondor. I kind of would have expected it to be Rohan. With, a Rohan name, but yeah, this isn't a very good card for me. I don't think I would play it even in a Gondor deck. Yeah, probably wouldn't even in a Gondor deck. It's possible he makes his way into a Gondor deck, but he's ranged. That makes him better in multiplayer, but in solo, no, I don't think so. The Gathering Storm, 0 cost. Planning action, search the top 5 cards of the encounter deck for an enemy. Add that enemy to the staging area to reduce the cost of the first ally you play this phase by X, where X is that enemy's threat. Okay, well, cost reduction, so you get cost reduction just cost reduction. Cost reduction is at its best early in the game. Talked about that in a previous card review. Cost reduction is at its best early in the game because late in the game we typically find that we don't have much left to play as we've played what the deck is designed to play. We've got resources just building up on heroes. So at that point cost reduction isn't very useful. It's at its best like turn 1, turn 2, and then it slowly declines from there in its usefulness. And this card is not good on turn 1 or turn 2 because in the exchange for the cost reduction you have to add an enemy to the staging area, and it can be a horrifying enemy because you don't control what's coming out of the top 5. It could be the only card there is a horrifying, or the only enemy card in the top 5 cards of the encounter deck is a horrifying enemy. So sometimes it's going to be really, really bad for you if you played this on turn 1 or turn 2, which is when its good ability, the cost reduction, is at its best for you. I'm not a fan of this for true solo. I don't think it's very good adding a enemy to staging in the early game against true solo. That's often something we can't handle. So, not too much of a fan of this card. Not a fan of it at all, really. Put off pursuit. 1 cost attached to the active location, so it's good for the Haldan deck. Attached location gets +2 quest points. When attached location is explored, discard cards from the encounter deck until a location is discarded. Add that location to the staging area to choose a non-unique enemy in the staging area and shuffle it into the encounter deck. Interesting. How would this work with that 1 card that reduces the quest points of the location to 0? Or to 1? Would it be 1 + 2 for this card? Or would the other attachment cancel out this +2 quest points and still make it 1? I wonder. Well, this seems similar to the Gathering Storm in that it does something negative in order to do something positive. The negative thing that it does, adding a location, isn't as bad as the one the Gathering Storm does, which is adding an enemy. But it's not good in the early game. It can help you, though. It can help you stabilize to have a location instead of an enemy. It's a pretty big downside with the +2 quest points. Could make sense in the Haldan deck. I don't know. This card might be worth a look in the Haldan deck. Helps stabilize a little bit. You draw a card with Haldan. It could help against some specific challenges with the Haldan deck, like shuffling a hill troll in that you start with and staging or some other horrifying thing. So it's another way to help you stabilize in the early game if you got it out like turn 1 and then you completed it turn 2, which isn't super likely given that it gives the attached location +2 quest points. So that's kind of not likely to happen, but would be really good if it did. This card is just okay. It might be really good in some situations, but just kind of meh in a lot of others. And I think it might get overshadowed by other location attachments in the Haldan deck. We've got quite a lot of them now. I don't think we got room for all of the ones that exist. And this one may fall by the wayside because it's got negatives to outweigh its positive, and the positive is good, really good sometimes, okay other times, and the negatives are maybe even at times might outweigh the positives depending on what's in the staging area. I don't think the best case usage for this card comes up enough to say it's a must include in the Haldan deck, and certainly not in a normal deck, at least not for me. But I think we've got other location attachments that make more sense in the Haldan deck and probably don't have use for all of them, space for all of them. So this card probably gets overshadowed by other things. And the last card is Fellowship. which is a contract. The first contract we've seen in the game. So a contract is a card that you start the game with. I used to play Star Wars CCG, and it seems similar to that game's objective cards, where you fulfill conditions and then you flip it over and it offers benefits. I like them in concept. Let's take a look at this one in particular. You cannot play non-unique allies or put non-unique allies into play. So that's a big restriction. When you control exactly 9 unique characters, flip this card over. You cannot play allies or put allies into play. Each character you control gets +1 willpower, +1 attack, and +1 shields. After a character you control leaves play, flip this card over. Well, this is a very, very thematic card. It's not an elite card, though. The restriction of not being able to play non-unique allies is very, very serious. Typically, decks will revolve around a couple of unique allies. Either your deck revolves around a couple of unique allies, or your deck revolves around attachments on a vital hero for its combat or shield needs. So you could still do that with Fellowship, play a deck that revolves around putting attachments on your heroes, and just play unique allies. But once you get so you have to get to 7 unique allies in play, or 6 unique allies in play, before you can flip it, and then you get +1, +1, +1 on all of them. It's a fun card. It's very fun. It adds nothing in the early game and hurts you quite a bit in your deck building possibilities. That's the reason that I say it's not elite, because true solo is weak in the early game, and anything that weakens you further needs to add quite a lot in the late game to make up for it. And not being able to play some non-unique allies in the early game weakens you. And in the late game, each character getting +1, +1, +1 is quite good. But we're talking really late game. We're talking, if you got 6 unique allies in play, your board's as stable as it gets at that point. You're not going to be like rushing out 6 unique allies and building up enemies and building up enemies. Because why? Because if you got that many unique allies out, your board's stable. And therefore you don't need this card. It's a win more card, which weakens you in the early game. A win more card that weakens you in the early game, it's a thematic card. Not a good one. But I'm loving the idea of contracts, the concept of contracts, and I'm very much looking forward to seeing what future contracts come out and what possibilities there are with them. But this one, it only has a beneficial effect once you're already set up, and therefore probably don't need it as much. But once you do get set up, you'll have a payoff, but not a payoff that you'll necessarily need. But still, I like the card a lot for its theming, and this expansion is worth a buy for me because of Merry, Pippin, and the One Ring. Those are very, very strong cards. Then you get some other fun stuff thrown in. So, thanks for watching.